evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind plagued with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve well rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. If I could impose on you a little bit before we get down to the serious business of trying to get you to sleep, I hope I can impose a couple of minutes to discuss some other business. This show is brought to you, as always, by the supporters on Patreon. I'm hearing from people all the time how valuable they find the show, and those supporters who have the means to help fund it, to keep it going, and help me to reach new audiences are very much appreciated. So if you're making use of Sleepy Time Tales regularly to help you to deal with sleeplessness, and you have the urge to support the show, and most importantly, if you have the means, please check out patreon.com/sleepytimetales or go to the link in the show notes or from the website. The main thing here is you will have the benefit and the satisfaction of knowing that you're contributing to the rest and lifestyle improvement of thousands of people every week. And over and above that, there are real rewards available from as little as $2 a month. From early release of the weekly episodes to weekly bonus episodes and special edits of the main show. I've got a new supporter that signed up recently, which was Karen T. Karen is one of those people helping me keep the show going, and she's also getting some very nice bonuses, including the weekly mini-sodes. If joining up for something for a month seems a little bit much, there are other methods of support listed in the show notes. Other than the Patreon, obviously, there's the tip jar, the merchandise store, and others. But another huge way you can help is simply to spread the word. If there is someone in your life who you think will benefit from listening to Sleepy Time Tales, just let them know. If you recommend the show on social media, please make sure to tag me in so that I can see and I can thank you. The tag is @SleepyTimeTales on Instagram or Twitter. Last but not least, of course, I need to shout out the music, which is Un Désert by Kumiku. Their music is available from their website, loyaltyfreakmusic.com. That's loyaltyfreakmusic.com. They've got a huge selection of stuff there available for people to use for creative projects, as well as just listening to, because a lot of it's very cool. I recommend taking a look. And I mentioned last week, I think I started backing them on Patreon recently, which is something I meant to do a lot sooner, because the song is a very important part of the show's identity. I'm also going through some of their stuff at the moment to try to find a new song, because episode 100 is coming up soon, and I think a little bit of a change is in order. But I promise you, whatever I come up with, it will be just as chill and mellow and distinctive and helpful to help you get to sleep. And I think that's enough of that for tonight. Thank you for your time. Let's get back to the show. So what exactly is Sleepy Time Tales? What is it for? It does seem a strange idea after all, a podcast that you're supposed to fall asleep to. But lack of sleep is a health crisis in the 21st century, and this is a podcast of sorts that is intended to help those that it can to get a restful night. Do you find yourself lying awake at night, with your mind spinning in emotions in turmoil with anxieties of 21st century life? Do you wake up in the middle of the night and find yourself not quite able to doze back off at 3 a.m.? I'm here to help. My name is Dave, and I'm your narrator, here to help you into a restful night. I'm someone who has struggled to sleep ever since I was a baby. My parents had sleepless nights with me for many years, and even once I got old enough not to be a bother for them anymore, sleep really was always a struggle for me. I knew a lot of people that used to like sleeping with the TV or the radio on, But those things didn't really work for me. Nothing really worked for me, but I preferred its silence to the tendency for the TV to have bright lights and loud adverts keeping me awake, or the radio having music and also again advertising, which would disturb my sleep. Of the options available, nothing seemed better. But it was one night when I was just coming to terms with the fact that I probably wasn't going to sleep, when I went to bed with a podcast to listen to, something that I was interested in and wanted to follow along with. And I found myself waking up when I got to the theme music at the end of the show. There was something about the droning voices and the tendency for a podcast to be pretty much the same volume the whole way across that acted almost like a tranquilizer for me. Once I worked through the backlog of some shows that I kind of liked but wasn't overly concerned about sleeping through, I discovered that there were some out there specifically designed for the purpose of actually helping people to sleep. I tried out one or two and settled on one that really worked for me very well initially, but when I recommended it to others, for various reasons, it didn't work for them. Sometimes they didn't like the narrator's voice, or they didn't like the style of storytelling. So I thought to myself, I've got a boring, drony voice and maybe a slightly different storytelling style. So maybe I can step into a little gap there and help reach some other insomniacs. Now, every episode starts with this long intro. It usually goes on roughly 15 minutes. And while it's one thing that if I do get a complaint about the show, that's one of them, it actually serves a couple of very important purposes. First up, obviously, as I've been doing already, I need to make a case for the show to people who've come across it. I need to try explain why I think it's helpful, the thought process behind it, and how I think it's helpful for you to engage with it. But there are thousands of people that listen to the show every week, and a lot of them have been with me from the start. Now, obviously, they don't need it to explain to them every week how to listen to the show. But it does serve a purpose for them as well. Now, one thing with insomnia is, in a lot of ways, it's like a bad habit. It's a tendency that we've developed over our lives of the odd struggle that have led to bad sleep hygiene and bad pre-bedtime habits. So in a way, this intro, which, as I say, does go along for a little while, is there to help develop a new bedtime habit, more healthier bedtime hygiene, rather than sitting on your phone, staring at it and reading Twitter or listening to music or watching something on TV. Rather, this is something that's intended for you to listen to while you get yourself ready for bed. Brush your teeth, have a drink of water, make sure your environment's nice and comfortable. Make sure your room's not too warm, but snuggle yourself nice and warmly. And get yourself ready for sleep. Hopefully, if all goes well, by the time you get to the story, you're going to be fast asleep before you get there. Now, as far as I know, for new listeners, there's a couple of different ways to engage with the show. For me, I need something to focus on, some kind of story or event that lets me keep my mind on something specific, to stop it from spinning out into stress and anxieties, to focus just enough not to resist the embrace of a night's sleep when it comes for me. But some people might have something a little bit different that they need. Some people like white noise or the sound of the ocean or the sound of the wind in the trees, or maybe just some boring dude droning on in the background. The topic of tonight's droning, because we're going into the festive season, is The Life of Santa Claus by L. Frank Baum. I did the first section of Claus's life, early life last year. And now we pick up where Santa's an adult and he's gone out into the world to try and bring joy to the children. And it's very cute and charming about how he starts to make toys and how he gets looked after by a certain forest spirits and stuff so that he doesn't have to become a farmer or anything like that. Instead, focusing his life on bringing joy to the children that live near him. But what's really important is the droning, and that you don't try force sleep. Just keep a light mental grip on the story and allow the need for sleep to come for you. As I've said, hopefully you're asleep before I get to the end of the episode, but it is important you don't feel pressurized. If this is your first night listening to the show, I would say it's actually more likely that it doesn't work for you than it does. I suggest giving a solid 2 or 3 nights, preferably 3, to get a feel for if this thing is going to work for you. Because it's a bit of a strange idea, maybe you need to learn that you can trust me, that I'm not going to say anything weird to you while you're sleeping. I'm not, I'm mostly just going to be boring. But it's possible you may need some convincing, which is understandable. You may take a few nights for you to get used to my accent, which is possibly a bit of a strange one to you. Or quite possibly one episode just isn't long enough. What I suggest you do, it's what I do with my sleep podcasts, is I download a whole bunch of them. I use Podcast Addict for my podcasts, and I download a whole bunch of the things that I listen to, and I start with the latest episode, and then I just let them run through all night. Because sometimes it takes longer than that intro or the length of one episode to fall asleep, especially if I'm going through a rough episode. Or even sometimes, alternatively, I go to sleep okay, which is actually more common these days. I fall asleep all right. But my problem comes in that I wake up in the middle of the night. At 3 a.m., I have a tendency to wake up and I can't get back to sleep again. So what I do is, because I have my podcasts just running, I pop my earbuds in because they've probably fallen out. And I just waft back to sleep. Sometimes even I wake up a little bit before my alarm goes. And that used to be extremely frustrating for me, but I started to do the same thing. Just pop my earbuds in and fall asleep, and there we go. Sometimes I get an extra 30 minutes or 69 minutes sleep before the designated alarm time, and it may sound a little bit strange. After all, what's the point of 30 minutes of sleep? But I've got to tell you that sometimes that 30 minutes is the best part of my night. There's something about allowing yourself to relax properly right before the alarm goes that is just deeply, deeply satisfying. So if you're using this to help you go to sleep at night, or help you go back to sleep in the middle of the night or early in the morning, it's very important that you try to relax. If you're new to the show and prone to late nights lying staring at the ceiling, this will probably seem strange to you. In fact, it would be strange if it didn't. So I just request that you give it a chance. And so that's the basic idea. You relax and you lie in the dark. And while you do that, I tell you a tale. So relax, dear listener, my nighttime friend who has elected to lie in the dark, listening to my voice. You will always be safe with me. I'm here to help you relax, to improve your life in a small way. People don't sleep very well these days, and it makes their lives harder. So I'm here to do my small part to help you in a big way. To help you to face tomorrow and the day after, well rested and better able to cope and process. I believe very strongly in kindness. I want to be kind to you. I want to share kindness to you, with you. And even more importantly, you really need to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up or rebuke yourself over not sleeping. Don't get tense if you just can't get yourself over the edge of sleep, even with me here in your ears, trying to help. Frustration is one of the great enemies of a good night's sleep, and the intention with this podcast is to short-circuit that frustration, to distract the feeling we get when we blame ourselves for not being able to let go and drift into the dark. So take a breath. Forgive the fact you can't sleep and let my voice wash over you. Take another breath. Imagine the warm darkness rising up, inviting you to sleep into a better life starting tomorrow. If you've had a life of insomnia, sleep can feel like your enemy. But it's not an enemy. It's a natural process that we've been pulled away from by stress and life, and progress shining bright lights in our eyes at all hours. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So if you're still with me, thank you for staying. If you're already asleep, we'll chat again soon. And of course, you aren't hearing me, except maybe in a dream. From The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus by L. Frank Baum. Manhood. 1. The Laughing Valley. When Claus came, the valley was empty, save for the grass, the brook, the wildflowers, the bees, and the butterflies. If he would make his home here and live after the fashion of men, he must have a house. This puzzled him at first, but while he stood smiling in the sunshine, he suddenly found beside him old Nelko, the servant of the master woodsman. Nelko bore an axe, strong and broad, with blade that gleamed like burnished silver. This he placed in the young man's hand, then disappeared without a word. Claus understood, and turning to the forest edge, he selected a number of fallen tree trunks, which he began to clear of their dead branches. He would not cut into a living tree. His life among the nymphs who guarded the forest had taught him that a live tree is sacred, being a created thing endowed with feeling. But with the dead and fallen trees it was different. They had fulfilled their destiny as active members of the forest community, and now it was fitting that their remains should minister to the needs of man. The axe bit deep into the logs at every stroke. It seemed to have a force of its own, and Claus had but to swing and guard it. When shadows began creeping over the green hills to lie in the valley overnight, the young man had chopped many logs into equal lengths and proper shapes for building a house, such as he had seen the poorer classes of men inhabit. Then, resolving to wait another day before he tried to fit the logs together, Claus ate some of the sweet roots he well knew how to find, drank deeply from the laughing brook, and lay down to sleep on the grass, first seeking a spot where no flowers grew, lest the weight of his body should crush them. And while he slumbered and breathed in the perfume of the wondrous valley, the spirit of happiness crept into his heart and drove out all terror and care and misgivings. Nevermore would the face of Claus be clouded with anxieties. Nevermore would the trials of life weigh him down as with a burden. The laughing valley had claimed him for its own. Would that we all might live in that delightful place, but then maybe it would become overcrowded. For ages it had awaited a tenant. Was it chance that led young Claus to make his home in this happy vale? Or maybe you guessed that his thoughtful friends, the immortals, had directed his steps when he wandered away from Burzy to seek a home in the great world. Certain it is that while the moon peered over the hilltop and flooded with its soft beams the body of the sleeping stranger, the laughing valley was filled with queer crooked shapes of the friendly knooks. These people spoke no words, but worked with skill and swiftness. The logs Claus had trimmed with his bright axe were carried to a spot beside the brook and fitted one upon another, and during the night a strong and roomy dwelling was built. The birds came sweeping into the valley at daybreak, and their songs, so seldom heard in the deep wood, aroused the trained stranger. He rubbed the web of sleep from his eyelids and looked around. The house met his gaze. "I must thank the knooks for this," said he gratefully. Then he walked to his dwelling and entered at the doorway. A large room faced him, having a fireplace at the end and a table and a bench in the middle. Beside the fireplace was a cupboard. Another doorway was beyond. Claus entered here also and saw a smaller room with a bed against the wall and a stool near a small stand. On the bed were many layers of dried moss brought from the forest. "Indeed it is a palace," exclaimed the smiling Claus. "I must thank the good Knooks again, for their knowledge of man's needs as well as for their labours on my behalf." He left his new home with a glad feeling that he was not quite alone in the world, although he had chosen to abandon his forest life. Friendships are not easily broken, and their mortals are everywhere. Upon reaching the brook, he drank of the pure water, and then sat down upon the bank to laugh at the mischievous gambols of the ripples as they pushed one another against rocks, or crowded desperately to see which should first reach the turn beyond. As they raced away, he listened to the song they sang. "Rushing, pushing, on we go, not a wave may gently flow. All are too excited, every drop delighted, turns to spray in merry play as we tumble on our way." Next, Claus searched for roots to eat, while the daffodils turned their little eyes up to him laughingly and lisped their dainty song. "Blooming fairly, growing rarely, never florets were so gay, perfume breathing, joy bequeathing, as our colours we display." It made Claus laugh to hear the little things voice their happiness as they nodded gracefully on their stems. But another strain caught his ear as the sunbeams fell gently across his face and whispered, "Here is gladness that our rays warm the valley through the days. Here is happiness to give comfort unto all who live." "Yes," cried Claus in answer. "There is happiness and joy in all things here. The laughing valley is a valley of peace and goodwill." He passed the day talking with the ants and beetles and exchanging jokes with the light-hearted butterflies, and at night he lay on his bed of soft moss and slept soundly. Then came the fairies, merry but noiseless, bringing skillets and pots and dishes and pans, and all the tools necessary to prepare food and to comfort a mortal. With these they filled cupboard and fireplace, finally placing a stout suit of wool clothing on the stool by the bedside. When Claus awoke, he rubbed his eyes again and laughed, and spoke aloud his thanks to the fairies and the master woodsman who had sent them. With eager joy he examined all his new possessions, wondering what some might be used for. But in the days when he had clung to the girdle of the great Uck and visited the cities of men, his eyes had been quick to note all the manners and customs of the race to which he belonged. So he guessed from the gifts brought by the fairies that the master expected him hereafter to live in the fashion of his fellow creatures. "Which means I must plough the earth and plant corn," he reflected, "so that when winter comes I shall have garnered food in plenty." But as he stood in the grassy valley, he saw that to turn up the earth in furrows would be to destroy hundreds of pretty helpless flowers, as well as thousands of the tender blades of grass, and this he could not bear to do. Therefore he stretched out his arms and uttered a peculiar whistle he had learned in the forest, afterward crying, "Rolls of the field flowers, come to me." Instantly a dozen of the queer little rolls were squatting upon the ground before him, and they nodded to him in cheerful greeting. Claus gazed upon them earnestly. "Your brothers of the forest," he said, "I have known and loved many years. I shall love you also when we have become friends. To me the laws of the rolls, whether those of the forest or of the field, are sacred. I have never willfully destroyed one of the flowers you tend so carefully, but I must plant grain to use for food during the cold winter, and how am I to do this without killing the little creatures that sing to me so prettily of their fair fragrant blossoms?" The yellow roll, he who tends the buttercups, made answer, "Fret not, friend Claus. The great Uck has spoken to us of you. There is better work for you in life than to labour for food, and though, not being of the forest, Uck has no command over us, Nevertheless, we are glad to favor one he loves. Live, therefore, to do the good work you are resolved to undertake. We, the field rolls, will attend to your food supplies. After this speech, the rolls were no longer to be seen, and Claus drove from his mind the thought of tilling the earth. When next he wandered back to his dwelling, a bowl of fresh milk stood upon the table. Bread was in the cupboard, and sweet honey filled a dish beside it. A pretty basket of rosy apples and new-plucked grapes were also awaiting him. He called out, "Thanks, my friends," to the invisible rolls, and straightway began to eat of the food. Thereafter, when hungry, he had but to look into the cupboard to find goodly supplies brought by the kindly rolls, and the knooks cut and stacked much wood for his fireplace, and the fairies brought him warm blankets and clothing. So began his life in the Laughing Valley, with the favor and friendship of the immortals to minister to his every want. 2. How Claus made the first toy. Truly our Claus has wisdom, for his good fortune but strengthened his resolve to befriend the little ones of his own race. He knew his plan was approved by the immortals, else they would not have favored him so greatly. So he began at once to make acquaintance with mankind. He walked through the valley to the plain beyond, and crossed the plain in many directions to reach the abodes of men. These stood singly or in groups of dwellings called villages, and in nearly all the houses, whether big or little, Claus found children. The youngsters soon came to know his merry, laughing face, and the kind glance of his bright eyes, and the parents, while they regarded the young man with some scorn for loving children more than in their elders, were content that the boys and girls had found a playfellow who seemed willing to amuse them. So the children romped and played games with Claus, and the boys rode upon his shoulders, and the girls nestled in his strong arms, and the babies clung fondly to his knees. Wherever the young man chanced to be, the sound of childish laughter followed him, and to understand this better, you must know that children were much neglected in those days, and received little attention from their parents. So that it became to them a marvel that so goodly a man as Claus devoted his time to making them happy. And those who knew him were, you may be sure, very happy indeed. The sad faces of the poor and abused grew bright for once. The cripple smiled despite his misfortune, the ailing ones hushed their moans, and the grieved ones their cries when their merry friend came nigh to comfort them. Only at the beautiful palace of the Lord of Lurd, and at the frowning castle of the Baron Braun, was Claus refused admittance. There were children at both places, but the servants at the palace shut the door in the young stranger's face, and the fierce baron threatened to hang him from an iron hook on the castle walls. Whereupon Claus sighed and went back to the poorer dwellings where he was welcome. After a time, the winter drew near. The flowers lived out their lives and faded and disappeared. The beetles burrowed far into the warm earth, the butterflies deserted the meadows, and the voice of the brook grew hoarse as if it had taken cold. One day snowflakes filled all the air in the Laughing Valley, dancing boisterously towards the earth, and clothing in pure white raiment at the roof of Claus's dwelling. At night, Jack Frost rapped at the door. "Come in," cried Claus. "Come out," answered Jack, "for you have a fire inside." So Claus came out. He had known Jack Frost in the forest and liked the jolly rogue, even while he mistrusted him. "There will be rare sport for me tonight, Claus," shouted the sprite. "Isn't this glorious weather? I shall nip scores of noses and ears and toes before daybreak." "If you love me, Jack, spare the children," begged Claus. "And why?" asked the other in surprise. "They are tender and helpless," answered Claus. "But I love to nip the tender ones," declared Jack. "The older ones are tough and tie my fingers." "The young ones are weak and cannot fight you," said Claus. True, agreed Jack thoughtfully. Well, I'll not pinch a child this night, if I can resist the temptation, he promised. Good night, Claus. Good night. The young man went in and closed the door, and Jack Frost ran on to the nearest village. Claus threw a log in the fire, which burned up brightly. Beside the hearth sat Blinky, a big cat given to him by Peter the Knook. Her fur was soft and glossy, and she purred never-ending songs of contentment. I shall not see the children again soon, said Claus to the cat, who kindly paused in her song to listen. The winter is upon us, the snow will be so deep for many days, and I shall be unable to play with my little friends. The cat raised a paw and stroked her nose thoughtfully, but made no reply. So long as the fire burned and Claus sat in his easy chair by the hearth, she did not mind the weather. So passed many days and many long evenings. The cupboard was always full, but Claus became weary with having nothing to do more than feed the fire from the big woodpile the Knooks had brought him. One evening he picked up a stick of wood and began to cut it with a sharp knife. He had no thought at first, except to occupy his time, and he whistled and sang to the cat as he carved away portions of the stick. Puss sat up on her haunches and watched him, listening at the same time to her master's merry whistle, which she loved to hear even more than her own purring songs. Claus glanced at Puss and then at the stick he was whittling, until presently the wood began to have a shape, and the shape was like the head of a cat with 2 ears sticking upward. Claus stopped whistling to laugh, and then both he and the cat looked at the wooden image in some surprise. Then he carved out the eyes and the nose and rounded the lower part of the head, so that it rested upon a neck. Puss hardly knew what to make of it now, and sat up stiffly, as if watching with some suspicion what would come next. Claus knew. The head gave him an idea. He plied his knife carefully and with skill, forming slowly the body of the cat, which he made to sit upon its haunches as the real cat did, with her tail wound around her 2 front legs. The work cost him much time, but the evening was long and he had nothing better to do. Finally, he gave a loud and delighted laugh at the result of his labors, and placed the wooden cat, now completed, upon the hearth opposite the real one. Puss thereupon glared at her image, raised her hair in anger, and uttered a defiant mew. The wooden cat paid no attention, and Claus, much amused, laughed again. Then Blinky advanced toward the wooden image, to eye it closely and smell of it intelligently. Eyes and ears told her the creature was wood, in spite of his natural appearance, so Puss resumed her seat and her purring, but as she neatly washed her face with a padded paw, she cast more than one admiring glance at her clever master. Perhaps she felt the same satisfaction we feel when we look upon good photographs of ourselves. The cat's master was himself pleased with his handiwork, without knowing exactly why. Indeed, he had great cause to congratulate himself that night, and all the children throughout the world should have joined him rejoicing, for Claus had made his first toy. 3. How the Rolls Colored the Toys. A hush lay on this laughing valley now. Snow covered it like a white spread, and pillows of downy flakes drifted before the dwelling where Claus sat feeding the blaze of the fire. The brook gurgled on beneath a heavy sheet of ice, and all living things and insects nestled close to Mother Earth to keep warm. The face of the moon was hid by dark clouds, and the wind, delighting in the wintry sport, pushed and whirled the snowflakes in so many directions that they could get no chance to fall to the ground. Claus heard the wind whistling and shrieking in its play, and thanked the good Knooks again for his comfortable shelter. Blinky washed her face lazily and stared at the coals with a look of perfect content. The toy cat sat opposite the real one and gazed straight ahead, as toy cats should. Suddenly Claus heard a noise that sounded different from the voice of the wind. It was more like a wail of suffering and despair. He stood up and listened, but the wind, growing boisterous, shook the door and rattled the windows to distract his attention. He waited until the wind was tired, and then, still listening, he heard once more the shrill cry of distress. Quickly he drew on his coat, pulled his cap over his eyes, and opened the door. The wind dashed in and scattered the embers over the hearth, at the same time blowing Blinky's fur so furiously that she crept under the table to escape. Then the door was closed and Claus was outside, peering anxiously into the darkness. The wind laughed and scolded and tried to push him over, but he stood firm. The helpless flakes stumbled against his eyes and dimmed his sight, but he rubbed them away and looked again. Snow was everywhere, white and glittering. It covered the earth and filled the air. The cry was not repeated. Claus turned to go back into the house, but the wind caught him unawares and he stumbled and fell across a snowdrift. His hand plunged into the drift and touched something that was not snow. This he seized, and pulling it gently towards him, found it to be a child. The next moment he had lifted it in his arms and carried it into the house. The wind followed him through the door, but Claus shut it out quickly. He laid the rescued child on the hearth, and brushing away the snow, he discovered it to be Wickham, a little boy who lived in a house beyond the valley. Claus wrapped a warm blanket around the little one and rubbed the frost from his limbs. Before long the child opened his eyes and, seeing where he was, smiled happily. Then Claus warmed milk and fed it to the boy slowly, while the cat looked on with sober curiosity. Finally, the little one curled up in his friend's arms and sighed and fell asleep, and Claus, filled with gladness that he had found the wanderer, held him closely while he slumbered. The wind, finding no more mischief to do, climbed the hill and swept on towards the north. This gave the weary snowflakes time to settle down to earth, and the valley became still again. The boy, having slept well in the arms of his friend, opened his eyes and sat up. Then, as a child will, he looked around the room and saw all that it contained. "Your cat is a nice cat, Claus," he said at last. "Let me hold it." But Puss objected and ran away. "The other cat won't run, Claus," continued the boy. "Let me hold that one." Claus placed the toy in his arms, and the boy held it lovingly and kissed the tip of its wooden ear. "How did you get lost in the storm, Wickham?" asked Claus. "I started to walk to my auntie's house and lost my way," answered Wickham. "Were you frightened?" "It was cold," said Wickham, "and the snow got in my eyes, so I could not see. Then I kept on till I fell in the snow, without knowing where I was, and the wind blew the flakes over me and covered me up." Claus gently stroked his head, and the boy looked up at him and smiled. "I'm all right now," said Wickham. "Yes," replied Claus happily. "Now I'll put you in my warm bed and you must sleep till morning, when I will carry you back to your mother." "May the cat sleep with me?" asked the boy. "If you wish it to," answered Claus. "It's a nice cat," Wickham said, smiling, as Claus tucked the blankets around him, and presently the little one fell asleep with a wooden toy in his arms. When morning came, the sun claimed the laughing valley and flooded it with his rays, so Claus prepared to take the lost child back to his mother. "May I keep the cat, Claus?" asked Wickham. "It's nicer than real cats. It doesn't run away or scratch or bite. May I keep it?" "Yes, indeed," answered Claus, pleased that the toy he had made could give pleasure to the child. So he wrapped the boy and the wooden cat in a warm cloak, perched the bundle upon his own broad shoulders, and then he tramped through the snow and the drifts of the valley, and across the plain beyond to the poor cottage where Wickham's mother lived. "See, Mamma," cried the boy as soon as they entered. "I've got a cat." The good woman wept tears of joy over the rescue of her darling, and thanked Claus many times for his kind act. So he carried a warm and happy heart back to his home in the valley. That night he said to Puss, "I believe the children will love the wooden cats almost as well as the real ones, and they can't hurt them by pulling their tails and ears. I'll make another." So this was the beginning of his great work. The next cat was made better than the first. While Claus sat whittling it out, the yellow roll came in to make him a visit, and so pleased was he with the man's skill that he ran away and brought several of his fellows. There sat the red roll, the black roll, the green roll, the blue roll, and the yellow roll in a circle on the floor, while Claus whittled and whistled and the wooden cat grew into shape. "If it could be made the same color as a real cat, no one would know the difference," said the yellow roll thoughtfully. "The little ones maybe would not know the difference," replied Claus, pleased with the idea. "I will bring you some of the red that I colored my roses and tulips with," cried the red roll, "and you can make the cat's lips and tongue red." "I will bring some of the green that I color my grasses and leaves with," said the green roll, "and you can color the cat's eyes green." "They'll need a bit of yellow also," remarked the yellow roll. "I must fetch some of the yellow that I used to color my buttercups and goldenrods with." "The real cat is black," said the black roll. "I will bring some of the black that I used to color the eyes of my pansies with, and then you can paint your wooden cat black." "I see you have a blue ribbon around Blinky's neck," added the blue roll. "I will get some of the color that I used to paint the bluebells and forget-me-nots with, and then you can carve a wooden ribbon on the toy cat's neck and paint it blue." So the rolls disappeared, and by the time Claus had finished carving out the form of the cat, they were all back with paints and brushes. They made Blinky sit upon the table, that Claus might paint the toy cat just the right color, and when the word was done, the rules declared it as exactly as good as a live cat. "That is to all appearances," added the red roll. Blinky seemed a little offended by the attention bestowed upon the toy, and that she might not seem to approve the imitation cat, she walked to the corner of the hearth and sat down with a dignified air. But Claus was delighted, and as soon as morning came he started out and tramped through the snow across the valley and the plain until he came to a village. There in a poor hut near the walls of the beautiful palace of the Lord of Lurd, a little girl lay upon a wretched cot, moaning with pain. Claus approached the child and kissed her and comforted her, and then he drew the toy cat from beneath his coat, where he had hidden it, and placed it in her arms. And how well he felt himself repaid for his labor and his long walk, when he saw the little one's eyes grow bright with pleasure. She hugged the kitty tight to her breast, as if it had been a precious gem, and would not let it go for a single moment. The fever was quieted, the pain grew less, and she fell into a sweet and refreshing sleep. Claus laughed and whistled and sang all the way home. Never had he been so happy as on that day. When he entered his house, he found Shigra, the lioness, waiting for him. Since his babyhood, Shigra had loved Claus, and while he dwelt in the forest, she had come to visit him at Nerseel's bower. After Claus had gone to live in the Laughing Valley, Shigra became lonely and ill at ease, and now she had braved the snowdrifts, which all lions abhor, to see him once more. Shigra was getting old, and her teeth were beginning to fall out, while the hairs that tipped her ears and tail had changed from tawny yellow to white. Claus found her lying on his hearth, and he put his arms around the neck of the lioness and hugged her lovingly. The cat had retired into a far corner. She did not care to associate with Shigra. Claus told his old friend about the cats he had made, and how much pleasure they had given Weekum and the sick girl. Shigra did not know much about children. Indeed, if she met a child, she could scarcely be trusted not to devour it. But she was interested in Claus's new labors and said, "Those images seem to me very attractive, yet I cannot see why you should make cats, which are very unimportant animals. Suppose now that I am here, you make images of a lioness, the queen of all beasts. Then indeed your children will be happy and safe at the same time." Claus thought this was a good suggestion, so he got a piece of wood and sharpened his knife while Shigro crouched upon the hearth at his feet. With much care he carved the head in the likeness of the lioness, even to the two fierce teeth that curled over her lower lip, and the deep frowning lines above her wide open eyes. When it was finished, he said, "You have a terrible look, Shigro." "Then the image is like me," she answered, "for I am indeed terrible to all who are not my friends." Claus now carved out the body with Shigro's long tail trailing behind it. The image of the crouching lioness was very lifelike. "It pleases me," said Shigro, yawning and stretching her body gracefully. "Now I will watch while you paint." He brought the paints the rolls had given him from the cupboard and colored the image to resemble the real Shigro. The lioness placed her big padded paws upon the edge of the table and raised herself, while she carefully examined the toy that was her likeness. "You are indeed skillful," she said proudly. "The children will like that better than cats, I'm sure." Then, snarling at Blinky, who arched her back in terror and whined fearfully, she walked away towards her forest home with stately strides. 4. How little Mary became frightened. The winter was over now, and all the Laughing Valley was filled with joyous excitement. The brook was so happy at being free once again that it gurgled more boisterously than ever, and dashed so recklessly against the rocks that it sent showers of spray high in the air. The grass thrust its sharp little blades upward through the mat of dead stalks where it had hidden from the snow, but the flowers were yet too timid to show themselves, though the rills were busy feeding their roots. The sun was in remarkably good humor and sent his rays dancing merrily through the valley. Claus was eating his dinner one day when he heard a timid knock on his door. "Come in," he called. No one entered, but after a pause came another rapping. Claus jumped up and threw open the door. Before him stood a small girl holding a smaller brother fast by the hand. "Is that you, Claus?" she asked shyly. "Indeed I am, my dear," he answered with a laugh as he caught both children in his arms and kissed them. "You are very welcome, and you have come just in time to share my dinner." He took them to the table and fed them with fresh milk and nut cakes. When they had eaten enough, he asked, "Why have you made this long journey to see me?" "I want to tat," replied little Mary, and her brother, who had not yet learned to speak many words, nodded his head and exclaimed like an echo, "Tat." "Oh, you want my toy cats, do you?" returned Claus, greatly pleased to discover that his creations were so popular with children. The little visitors nodded eagerly. "Unfortunately," he continued, "I have but one cat now ready, for I carried two to children in the town yesterday. And the one I have shall be given to your brother, Mary, because he is the smaller. And the next one I shall make for you." The boy's face was bright with smiles as he took the precious toy Claus held out to him, but little Mary covered her face with her arm and began to sob grievously. I want to tat now," she wailed. Her disappointment made Claus feel miserable for a moment. Then he suddenly remembered Shigro. "Don't cry, darling," he said soothingly. "I have a toy much nicer than a cat, and you shall have that." He went to the cupboard and drew out the image of the lioness, which he placed on the table before Mary. The girl raised her arm and gave one glance at the fierce teeth and glaring eyes of the beast, and then uttering a terrified scream, she rushed from the house. The boy followed her, also screaming lustily, and even dropping his precious cat in his fear. For a moment, Claus stood motionless, being puzzled and astonished. Then he threw Shigro's image into the cupboard and ran after the children, calling to them to not be frightened. Little Mary stopped in her flight, and her brother clung to her skirt, but they both cast fearful glances at the house until Claus had assured them many times that the beast had been locked in the cupboard. Yet why were you frightened at seeing it? He asked. It is only a toy to play with. It's bad, said Mary, decidedly, and just horrid, and not a bit nice like cats. Perhaps you're right, returned Claus thoughtfully. But if you return with me to the house, I will soon make you a pretty cat. So they timidly entered the house again, having faith in their friend's words, and afterward they had the joy of watching Claus carve out a cat from a bit of wood and paint it to natural colours. It did not take him long to do this, for he had become quite skillful with his knife by this time, and Mary loved her toy the more dearly because she had seen it made. After his little visitor had trotted away on their journey homeward, Claus sat long in deep thought. Then he decided that such fierce creatures as his friend the lioness would never do as models from which to fashion his toys. There must be nothing to frighten the dear babies, he reflected, and while I know she grew well and I am not afraid of her, it is but natural that children should look upon her image with horror. Hereafter I will choose such mild-mannered animals as squirrels and rabbits and deer, and lambkins from which to carve my toys, for then the little ones will love rather than fear them. He began his work that very day, and before bedtime had made a wooden rabbit and a lamb. They were not quite so lifelike as the cats had been, because they were formed from memory, while Blinky had sat very still for Claus to look at while he worked. But the new toys pleased the children nevertheless, and the fame of Claus's playthings quickly spread to every cottage on plain and in village. He always carried his gifts to the sick or crippled children, but those who were strong enough walked to the house in the valley to ask for them. So a little path was soon worn from the plain to the door of the toy-maker's cottage. First came the children who had been the playmates of Claus before he began to make toys. These, you may be sure, were well supplied. Then children who lived further away heard of the wonderful images and made journeys to the valley to secure them. All little ones were welcome, and never a one went away empty-handed. This demand for his handiwork kept Claus busily occupied, but he was quite happy in knowing the pleasure he gave to so many of the dear children. His friends, the immortals, were pleased with his success and supported him bravely. The knooks selected for him clear pieces of soft wood, that his knife might not be blunted in cutting them. The rolls kept him supplied with paints of all colours and brushes fashioned from the tips of timothy grasses. The fairies discovered that the workmen needed saws and chisels and hammers and nails as well as knives, and brought him a goodly array of such tools. Claus soon turned his living room into a most wonderful workshop. He built a bench before the window and arranged his tools and paints so that he could reach everything as he sat on his stool. As he finished toy after toy to delight the hearts of little children, he found himself growing so gay and happy that he could not refrain from singing and laughing and whistling all the day long. It's because I live in the Laughing Valley where everything else laughs, said Claus. But that was not the reason. And I think I will leave it there tonight. As always, if you're interested in picking up the story where I've left off, or if you missed last year's episode and want to see where it starts again, you can find The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus on Project Gutenberg, which you will find at the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get new episodes whenever they come out. A reminder that the music for tonight is Undesirable Comico. Check out more of their work on their website, which you'll find linked in the show notes. Good night, and sweet dreams.